computer, and it is now recording. And I'm also going to go ahead and pull up my slides. So let me go and do that. Let me go ahead and go share my screen and do that. And go ahead and maximize this and get this out of the way. And then I'm going to go get that little bar out of the way, go down, and then go to slideshow. And then people, if they could give me a thumbs up in the that you're seeing it, cool.
Yeah.
So the topic today is, the title is The Coiled Splendor, Kundalini Yoga and Thelemic Magick. And so tonight I'm going to be talking about the relationship between the practice of Kundalini Yoga and Thelemic Magick. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it holds it's based on a presentation I gave at NotaCon, as I said, in Detroit in 2011. And I wrote an article in the Coph Nia wand, summer of 2013, which you can buy online. This is a picture of Charles Stanford Jones. This is the summer edition of the Coph Nia wand. So, it's out there, I think for like 10 bucks. And there's probably some digital copies that Darla has. So first off, a little bit about my background, just kind of, you can know who the speaker is and where I'm coming from. So I'm a cultural anthropologist. I did my training, Ph.D. at the University of Oregon. I finished it in 1999. And my focus in graduate school was on communities of discipline and practice in Asian spiritual traditions. And in particular, I wrote my master's thesis on a Kundalini Yoga practicing Sikh community in Eugene. It's still there, Yoga West. I spent about 10 months with them going through teachers training. And I wrote about that. And then I went off to Taiwan, and I spent about a year living with the Taoist group and wrote my doctorate based upon that experience. And the way I got introduced to Kundalini Yoga was through a Thelemite. When I first started my first year of graduate school, I was introduced to some people from the Coph Nia OTO back in 1993. And that basically led me to Kundalini Yoga and into Thelema. So for me, these two things are kind of very related. Like I came into Kundalini Yoga from a Thelemite, and Thelema has informed my Kundalini Yoga practice. And so that's kind of why I'm very passionate about this. After I finished my doctorate in 2000, I moved to the Bay Area, and I lived there for about 15 years, working as a practicing anthropologist in the technology industry. And I also spent a lot of time with the Thelemic community of the Bay Area. So first starting off in Thelema Lodge, then Mons Agnes Oasis in Marin County, and then Therion Babylon Oasis in El Cerrito, and this is all consolidated into Blazing Star in 2009. And while I was down there, I taught a lot of Kundalini Yoga classes to Thelemites. So like I said, there is a relationship in my mind, given that I came to Kundalini Yoga through Thelema, that is very close in relationship. So that's kind of what I'm going to be tracking throughout the talk, is like, what is Kundalini Yoga? How does it show up in Thelema? Like, how does it show up in some of the teachings of Aleister Crowley, Grady McMurtry, who was also a Kundalini Yoga teacher from the same teacher's lineage that I am, and Kenneth Grant. So basically, those are going to be the three main people I talk about. First, I'm going to give a definition about the practice, and then we're going to kind of go from there. So let me move forward in my slides, and please stop me if you have any questions as we go. Let me go ahead and progress. All right, so I'm going to start off with some quotes. So this first one: put on the wings and arouse the coiled splendor within you. Another one: there is a single definition of the object of all magical rituals. It is the uniting of the microcosm with the macrocosm. The supreme and complete ritual is therefore the invocation of the holy guardian angel, or in language of mysticism, union with God. And then finally, both the words for Messiah, Mashiach, and serpent, Nahash, add up to 358. Therefore, there is a deep-seated connection between the devil and salvation. The Book of Thoth, Atu 15, the devil. So here, at the heart of the prophet's explanation of the goal of magical ritual, along with the rapturous love poem taken from Thelema's central holy book, lies an exhortation, nay, a command for the aspirant. The prophet points the way towards union, and the great mother star goddess Nuit calls out to the individual, Hadit, to do some great work that will bring this person closer to union and realization of her love, agape, along with the realization and fulfillment of the individual's unique will and purpose in the world, Thelema. We as Thelemites understand that union is expressed in the idea of the integrated, empowered, and liberated androgynous child, Rahor Kuit, sometimes symbolized in the image and ideal of Baphomet. But what are the wings, and what is the coiled splendor that Nuit calls the adept to put on and elevate themselves with? I would argue that answer lies in the concept of the serpent power Kundalini and the practice of Kundalini Yoga, which I will try to show in this presentation lies at the very heart of the Thelemic project. Kundalini is defined metaphorically within the Tantric tradition as a coiled serpent lying coiled 3.5 times asleep at the base of the spine. This serpentine force, according to the famous writer on the topic, Gopi Krishna, is the latent evolutionary potential of a person's total unfolding and flowering on their path towards perfection and unique self-realization. Within the practice of Kundalini Yoga, this inner fire or soul force is gradually awakened and elevated within, along with the balancing and equilibration of both physical and subtle forces. This is the process of purifying, strengthening, and equilibrating one's total being. Through this process of purifying, strengthening, and equilibrating one's total being lays the foundation for uniting the individual with divinity and the gradual unfolding of their dharma or purpose, or using Thelemic language, true will in the world. The language should sound familiar, for as we know from Liber Libre, equilibrium is the basis of the work. So a few more quotes. The great work is uniting of opposites. It may mean the uniting of the soul with God, of the microcosm with the macrocosm, of the female with the male, of the ego with the non-ego. And lastly, magic is a pyramid built layer by layer. The work of the body of light with the techniques of yoga is the foundation of the whole. In these passages, Crowley lays out the foundation of what we understand as the great work, the unification of opposites and the cultivation of the body of light. Both are based fundamentally on the practice of yoga. From a tantric and hermetic point of view, what is this pyramid and what does it mean to build it layer by layer? The basic idea here is that there are developmental levels of consciousness that must be processed, integrated, and transformed and elevated through practice. There are a variety of frameworks in transpersonal psychology from Ken Wilber to Stanislav Grof that detail and unpack these levels. But for the sake of our discussion, we're going to keep it simple. To really grasp the centrality of Kundalini Yoga, this whole notion of the uniting of opposites and the building of this pyramid of the body of light, it's important to know a little bit of Tantric and Kabbalistic theory on the anatomy and physiology of consciousness. Keep in mind, as philosopher Alfred Korzybinski writes in Science and Sanity, the map is not the territory, and like all maps, there are slight variations and differences. That said, these maps are useful heuristics for understanding both the structure and the processes of conscious evolution. As I've said, Kundalini is considered in the Tantric tradition to be a primordial energy and power, Shakti, behind all creativity, transformation, and evolution in the universe. It's conceptualized as feminine in nature and seen as coiled in 3.5 spirals around the lower chakra, Muladhara, at the base of the spine. It's thought by bringing Kundalini Shakti, or this evolutionary energy, up one's Sushumna, or central channel of the subtle body to unite with Shiva at one's crown, one can attain liberation in this lifetime. That term is Jivan Mukti. Often conceptualized as a serpent, its rising and elevation through practice, called Kundalini Yoga, is seen also as the key to the full expression and perfection of one's potential in the world, associated with one's purpose or dharma. The practice of Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan involves a combination of Hatha Yoga style postures, asana, united into sequences called kriyas, breath work, i.e. pranayama, energy locks, bandhas, hand postures, mudras, and meditations, often involving the chanting of sacred words from the Sikh tradition, or mantra. It embodies the 8-fold dimensions of yoga that Crowley talks about in his 8 lectures on yoga: yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, i.e. do's and don'ts, posture, breath work, sense withdrawal, concentration, meditation, and union. It does this by focusing explicitly on raising the Kundalini energy up the spine to open the chakras or energy centers along the nadis or energy channels. So just looking at this really quickly, you have basically a central channel, Sushumna, you have Ida and Pingala, which reflect the sun and the moon, the positive and negative polarity. And then there's a set of energy centers that walk up the center. Many of you are familiar with this. And I'll be talking about how this practice actually works as we go deeper. When people think of Kundalini Yoga, one of the first things that comes to mind are the chakras. Chakras in Sanskrit basically means wheel, and these are subtle energetic centers associated with nervous plexi along the spine that are very much synonymous with what are called the dantians in Taoism, or elixir fields. The classic 7, starting from the bottom, are Muladhara, which is associated with your connection to the earth element. Its basic nature is earth, and it really has to do with how grounded are you in the material world. If it's too strong, you're too attached to the material world, and you can literally be an asshole. There's a reason I think that that word comes up. If it's too weak, you have no connection to basic survival strategies and worldliness. So you can have a positive pole and a negative pole. What you're seeking is balance. The next classic chakra coming up is Svadhisthana. This is often associated with your sexual organs, and it really has to do not only with sexuality, but creativity, because there's an intimate connection between creativity and the ability to bring forth ideas as well as life. And so, you can have it too strong, meaning, your sexuality is out of balance, potentially addiction, or you can have it too weak, i.e. you're frigid and you're disconnected from your life force. Moving up, the next chakra is Manipura. This is really associated with your identity, your will. When we think of willpower, it's often related to the navel point, which we call the navel point. That's why in martial arts, you see so much work on the hara, the dantian, the manipur chakra. They're all the same thing. Basically, this is really about your ability to commit to an idea and follow through it. We often do what are called 40-day commitments in this practice, where you'll stick with one practice for 40 days. You'll do a meditation, you'll do a kriya, and you'll commit. And by doing that, you strengthen. This can also be true for any exercise regimen, anything that you say, I'm going to do this one thing, and you do it. Crowley has plenty of examples of that, but basically willpower, not necessarily the transpersonal will, which you think about the higher voice, the true will. This is where willpower is cultivated. And it's really important because nothing that is gained from these higher chakras really translates into actual impact in the world if you don't have a strong navel point. So these first 3 chakras in Kundalini Yoga are called the lower triangle. They're basically your worldliness. Think about it, your groundedness in material reality, your sexuality, and your ego identity and willpower. And a lot of people, a lot of classic religions were like, oh, we want to get up and beyond that. But in Kundalini Yoga, it is a house. Your upper layers are only as good as the base layers and how well they're built. There's a great saying in ceremonial magic that how do you expect to have an awesome ketor if your Malkuth sucks? How do you expect to have these great transpersonal visions from above if the base of your foundation of your house isn't great? So this is kind of like the pyramid that's being built. This is the pyramid of the body of light that Crowley referenced as we're moving up through these layers. So the next chakra is the Anahata chakra. This is the heart chakra, and it's very important both in ceremonial magic and in tantric practice because it's the mediator. If you ever see the Star of David, an upper triangle and a lower triangle, it's mapped geometrically onto the Anahata chakra. And there's a reason for that because the upper 3 chakras are the upper triangle. So the interesting thing is that the heart chakra mediates the below, the above and the below. That's why you'll see so much talk in spiritual practice of living from the heart, because in theory, you're kind of combining these 2 powers together and you're working from that place. Now, if the heart is too strong or too, not strong, but if you can have a closed down heart chakra, meaning you are not able to have empathy for other people, you're not able to feel any kind of connection to anybody, you're closed off. You can also have a blown open heart chakra. People that do MDMA and they have this blowout experience of divine, love, but then they dumped all their serotonin and they're out of balance. So heart chakra, you want to have a balance between 2 open and 2 closed, like any of these chakras, we're seeking equilibrium. Then we get into the next one. This is the first of the upper triangle, the Sutta. This is about your voice, but it's not just how you creatively project your words. It's also how you write. It's also how you paint. The Sutta is about creative projection. So, it's how you put your voice or your word into the world. And so this is getting up into some of the more etheric chakras. It's about communication. It's about the ability to project your thoughts, your ideas. And they say that anytime somebody speaks, they're speaking from one of the other chakras. So you can pair the 5th chakra with your heart, speaking from the heart. You could be trying to get somebody to bed. You're trying to seduce them. So you're pairing the 5th chakra with your 2nd chakra. One of the things we're taught is try to check in, where is somebody speaking from? How are they connecting their Visuddha? What other chakra is paired up with it when they're trying to communicate? So important thing to think about in terms of how the chakras kind of unite with creative projection. So that's the 5th chakra. Then, and Crowley really emphasized the ajna, getting up to the so-called 3rd eye. 3rd eye is all about intuition. It's seeing the unseen, it's knowing the unknown. People that have sort of precognitive abilities, ability to sort of know what's going to happen, sense what's coming, ability to be in the right place at the right time. This is all about, the Ajna chakra, and it's the command center, because when you're basically coming from the Ajna chakra, you're coming from a place of direct knowing, direct intuition, not rational knowing, not like, falling down to the pit of because or the dogs of reason, not knowing inside of your cognitive brain, but direct knowing through gnosis, which is what the Ajna chakra is about accessing. And that can be closed off. People that are just amazingly lucky in some areas of their life, but they have no, out of a sudden they get blindsided. They just, it happens all the time. Things are going great, but all of a sudden they just get taken down by life. Their intuitive faculties potentially are not open. They're not, they're not there. They don't have that access open. So you definitely want to have a functioning Ajna chakra, because that has a lot to do with, sort of sensing your environment, knowing what you need to be doing. Are you in the right time? Are you in the right place? Being able to see beneath the surface of things. So that's the Ajna chakra. And then the Shashara chakra, the 10th gate, this is about opening to divinity. This is basically the connection between your finiteness and the macrocosm. They say in some yogic traditions that when you die, you basically, the subtle body wraps around your soul body, and then it shoots up the Shushumna and it goes out your crown. In some yoga practices, they teach masters to basically do that at the point of death. They basically consciously shoot themselves up through their crown into the macrocosm, astral projection, things like that. So Shashara is all about the connection between your physical finite self and the infinite. And so Kundalini Yoga is all about working these, balancing these, opening these, lining these up, and strengthening the connections between the two of them by raising the Kundalini Shakti up the spine so that it gradually unfolds and integrates all these things together. These are also mapped to the elements. So the first chakra at the base is earth. The Svadhisthana chakra at the sexual glands is water. Manipura chakra at the navel is fire. Anahata chakra at the heart is air. And then it becomes aether. So fifth chakra is all about sort of higher things. And then from there, there's no more real elements. So bottom line, they're all ultimately, the whole point of this, equilibrium is the basis of the work. The whole point of this is to open them, activate them, balance them, line them up, and strengthen them through practice. So that's kind of in a nutshell what you're doing when you're doing Kundalini Yoga. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions, because that was like a lot. And then I'm going to move on. Okay, so I'm going to continue. All right. So working within Hermetics, the tree of life is often our dominant framework for grasping levels of consciousness in the path of ascent or return along the initiatory trajectory of adept. The attempt to map the chakras to the tree of life is often used to create coherence between Western and Eastern symbol sets. So there, Charles Ponce, the first time I ever read a book on this, he basically was the first person I ever came across in his book on the Kabbalah, where he had mapped the tree of life to the body. And he says, oh, Tiferet, that's the heart chakra. Okay, Yesod, I guess that would be the sort of the combination of the second and third chakras. They don't map one to one, but there are people that try to map them together. And Crowley had some interesting things to say about this, and he uses languages of both systems, which I think is interesting. Oh, was there a question?
All right.
There you have to walk.
Oh yeah. Not long from now.
Sorry, maybe if you just go on mute. So yeah, Crowley used language from both systems, which I think is interesting. So I'm just going to recap what Crowley said. He said, and this is from Magic Book 4, chapter The Cup. There is a lotus of three. Maybe, I don't know now if you can mute that one. There is a lotus of 3 petals in the sacrum, in which, this is Crowley, in which the Kundalini lies asleep. This lotus is the receptacle of reproductive force. So basically he's talking about, he's using the word lotus as opposed to chakra, but same basic idea. And he's talking about the Muladhara chakra. There is also a 6-petal lotus opposite the navel, which receives the force which nourishes the body. So he's literally talking about the Manipura chakra. There is also a lotus in the solar plexus, which receives the nervous forces. So he's talking, actually he said the second, and now he's talking about the 3rd chakra. The 6-petaled lotus in the heart corresponds to Tiferet. So there, he himself is saying Tiferet corresponds to the heart chakra. That's not, you wouldn't find that amongst tantric yogis, but he himself is making that correlation that the heart chakra is Tiferet. The 16th petal lotus opposite the larynx receives the nourishment needed by the breath. So he's speaking about the Visuddha, the 5th chakra. The 2-petal lotus of the pineal gland receives the nourishment needed by thought. So he's associating the Ajna chakra, he's identifying the Ajna chakra. While above the junction of the cranial sutures is that sublime lotus of 1,001 petals, which receives the influence from on high, and which in the adept, the awakened Kundalini takes her pleasure with the Lord of all. So he's speaking to the Shashara chakra, and he's basically saying that the adept, having opened that, is basically communed with the all. So he is using the language of Kundalini with Kabbalah, sort of speaking to this kind of path of ascent in the words he's using. So in the Kabbalistic framework of the 4 worlds, Atziluth, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, we're really only dealing with the Asiatic world here, which is the worldly, the physical expression of the tree of life into the body, not the more etheric layers, but that's a whole side topic. I would say in general, though, that the tree of life framework is much more suited to working with imaginal forces and correspondences above Asiya, and the chakra model is much more suited to the energies of the physical and subtle body. So basically, this mapping of the Kabbalistic tree of life to the body is useful for me in seeing the correspondence to Tiferet, Yesod, but it kind of loses it after that. So maybe some people are able to sort of work both systems, but point really being here is that Crowley was trying to combine them together and make a point about there being sort of a common ground. Okay, so that is the anatomy of consciousness. This is the structure. Now I'm going to talk about the physiology of consciousness, which is basically the processes by which energies move through these different faculties to work this process of awakening, attunement, and alignment that is the goal of Kundalini Yoga. So moving on here to the nadis, I have a couple of quotes. I am the Lord of the double wand of power, the wand of the force of Coph Nia, but my left hand is empty, for I've crushed a universe, and naught remains. Liberal 372, very familiar with that. And the caduceus contains a complete symbol of the gnosis. The winged sun or phallus represents the joy of life on all planes, from the lowest to the highest. It is a symbol that unites the microcosm and the macrocosm, the symbol of the magical operation that accomplishes this. So according to Crowley, these lotuses are all situated in the spinal column, which has 3 channels. This is directly from him, which have 3 channels, Shushumna in the middle and Ida and Pingala on either side of the tree of life. He writes in book 4, chapter The Cup, the central channel is compressed at the spine by the Kundalini, the magical power. A sleeping serpent, awake her, she darts up the spine, and the prana flows to the Shushumna. But like in all physical systems, understanding the anatomy just gives you a sense of the structures. It's really in the physiology that you grasp the processes and motions of change. So Crowley was aware of the Shushumna, the Ida, and Pingala, but I'm going to explain exactly what they are. So you have these nervous plexi, you have these subtle energetic, centers that I've talked about, the chakras, but you basically also have nadis. Nadi means nerve channel, and there's 72,000 of them that run through the body, and they're pretty much synonymous with the acupressure meridians. They're the same basic idea. And really what they are is they're ways in which prana move through your body. So prana is life force, it's energy, but in Kundalini Yoga, there's 3 primary ones. The central one is Shushumna, and that's like, think of that as neutrality. It's like a neutral energy. Then you have Pingala, which is and I always mess these 2 up. Pingala is it's the lunar channel. And then you have Ida, which is the solar channel. And so basically think of it as positive, negative poles. And so you can also sort of map that to masculine and feminine energies within your psyche, whatever you want to think about. But the bottom line is you want these 2 forces both to be brought up together, and they innervate or they activate the Shushumna. And that's partly what Kundalini is doing, is it's almost like it's activating the solar and the lunar currents in your own central channel, and it's spinning this energy up through the chakras. And there's techniques to do just that. One of the biggest ones has to do with alternate nostril breathing, which corresponds to the 2 channels, the channels of your nostrils correspond to these two polarities within your subtle body. And by doing alternate nostril breathing, you're polarizing those two different channels, and thus you activate that neutral quality that then activates the subtle force to rise. So it's also interesting that so much of in Western Hermeticism, we talk about the middle pillar. And this is why the Kabbalistic model, you got the pillar of mercy, pillar of severity, you got the middle pillar. Is that the same thing as the Ida and Pingala and the Sushumna? People will say it is, some people say it doesn't. You know, does this map 1-to-1? I don't know. But the bottom line is that you're working with polarity, and you're trying to activate polarity within your subtle body energetically, and then balance those forces and bring them up as you do it. So given this, in my interpretation, the double one of Coph Nia is the subtle body itself with its solar and lunar currents corresponding to the Ida and Pingala, brought into equilibrium by the third channel, the Sushumna, which reconciles their duality in a higher order nothingness. By working this overarching framework, the adept will have crushed the universe and not remains. And we know that nothing is the secret key of this law. So, we have a term within Kundalini Yoga, which is shunya, which means void or emptiness, and so it's the same idea you'll find in Tibetan Tantra, in Buddhism, shunya, same notion. And so when you're working these energies, partly what the adept is trying to do is they're trying to void their consciousness of particularity and create a sense of the continuity of infinity, the body of Nuit. And that's my interpretation of the void that is being crushed here. Is in essence you're trying to overcome duality and overcoming particularity, and basically make yourself one with the body of Nuit. That's sort of an Thelemic read on what you're doing here in terms of the practice. So moving on. That's the anatomy, that's the physiology of consciousness. Basically the subtle channels, the polarity, and working with these opposites so that you can drive yourself into a state of shunya, or emptiness, or void consciousness beyond the opposites. As we know, nothing is a secret key of this law. And to me, that's what this is speaking to. So now that we understand the anatomy and physiology, the big question is, how do we do it? How do you put on the wings and arouse the coiled splendor? This leads us to two subtle forces, prana and apana. Prana is the life force, and apana is the eliminating force. Like positive, negative poles in an electric circuit, these two energies are the key to kindling the circuit flame and gradually coaching the Kundalini Shakti up the Sushumna to awaken the total self and attain that shunya, that void consciousness beyond the opposites. Yogi Bhajan, who brought the style of Kundalini Yoga to the West, he said, and this is his language, there is a way we should get our computer in direct contact with him. He used computer language. The biggest computer, and the biggest being the divine, and things must then work automatically. They can't work until the Kundalini, the spiritual nerve, breaks through the blockage at the Muladhara and thus travels up and reaches the stage that you may have, super consciousness and consciousness. It is to generate the pressure of apana and mix it with prana, and thus when the two join together, you generate its pranic power with this heat of prana. You put together a pressure or charge, and the Kundalini rises up. So I'm going to unpack what he's saying. So there, when you take in a breath, you inhale, you're bringing in prana into your body. So breath is coming in. But like if you ever have to go to the bathroom and you squeeze up on your lower muscles, which is called mulband, kegels, you're activating apana. So oftentimes in Kundalini Yoga, what you'll do is you'll inhale and you'll pull up. So what you're doing is you're pressurizing prana down, apana up. This like lights a spark. And so you'll see in a lot of Kundalini Yoga exercise, the end of every exercise, you'll inhale deeply and you'll pull up, you'll push down, and you'll try to suck energy up. So that's the prana and the apana being activated like a flame at the third chakra. And then that lights the Kundalini at the base of the spine, and it's activated to rise up. So this is pretty abstract theoretically because I'm just verbally describing it to you. I'd need to teach a class, but this is the real science to how you activate the nadis and how you drive the Kundalini up the chakra, the Sushumna, is inhale, pull up, compress, squeeze, and then it goes up. So there's a lot of practices at the end of any Kundalini Yoga exercise where you're doing just that. So that was there's a lot we could go into here, but I'm going to pause once again because that was a lot of theory about anatomy and physiology, and see if there's any questions before I move on to the next section? Nope. Okay. And I think it's interesting, the only sin of restriction, when you think about that, how that maps the physical body, what happens when something is blocked? This is something I do want to say. So there are 3 knots that are thought to exist. One at the navel point, one at the heart, and one at the root chakra, at the 5th chakra. So think of these knots as karmic blocks. You know, some people say, oh, I just don't have any willpower. I just don't have any oomph. So there's literally a word for that you can have a knot, you know, they're called granthis, that blocks the flow of your chi, your prana. You can also have a knot, and so it kind of disconnects the lower chakras from your heart, you know, and it kind of blocks them. So to me, that's a restriction. And then you can have a block at the throat chakra that basically disconnects your ability to express yourself. So to me, that's a restriction. And then you can have a block at the 3rd eye. You have no intuition, and that's a restriction. So for me, my reading of the only sin of restriction, and of course it's just me, when I map it to Kundalini, it's the restrictions of the flow of prana through your body because of karmic knots that you've accumulated through lifetimes that need to be released through practice, that will basically open the free flow of energy through your full subtle body so you can attain the maximum expression of your total being in the world. So, you know, I very esoterically read the Thelemic material through the lens of Kundalini Yoga, just my own mania here. All right, koshas. So this is one of my favorite topics. So when we think of the body, I'm just my physical body. Now, if you're a psychotherapist, be like, oh, you also have a mind. We think of the mind body. But in tantric lore, we actually have 5 bodies, and in some schools we have 10 bodies. So the way they think of it is think of it as like onion skins. You've got a core body, which is your physical body. They call it the food body, the anamaya kosha. It's what you eat. It's your flesh. It's your flesh body. Then there's a next layer around it. This is basically your, you know, it's like your energy body. It's basically like your chi body. It's, you know, it's prana. It's all the stuff we talked about, the nadis, the prana, acupoints. Then you have your mental emotional body that wraps around that. That's your thoughts, your emotions. Then you have your subtle body. You know, have you ever seen Dr. Strange and he'll like project himself out of himself, or just in Liber, you know, where Crowley talks about astral projection? This is what we're talking about, the subtle body. It's the map of yourself in subtle layers. And then you have the causal body, which is basically your bliss body. There's different words for this in Buddhism, but basically we're more than our meat sack in our brain. Nowhere in Western medicine do they acknowledge this, but this is really at the heart of, you know, tantric practice. And so when you're practicing Kundalini Yoga, you're working all 5 bodies. Well, we say 10. And so, you know, you can have sicknesses that can show up in any of these too. Like you can be sick in the physical body, but then what about a person that's terribly unlucky? Like they're just terribly unlucky. Well, maybe they have a karmic affliction in the subtle body, or maybe they're just super disconnected from a higher power. And so they just are blocked at the spiritual level. So point is there are afflictions at every layer, and there's a medicine at every layer. And one of the things about Kundalini Yoga is it basically gives you ability to deal with all 5 bodies: your energetic body, your physical body, your subtle, your mental emotional body, your subtle body, and your causal body. And there's practices that help you do just that. Western Hermetic magic does as well, less with the physical body really, but you know, it speaks to these higher level layers as well. So in Kundalini Yoga, we double them to 10 bodies. So basically there are 10 bodies, and I'm going to describe them. So you have the soul body, which is pretty much to me, it's the same thing as the Cobbs. It's the star within. It's the essence of who you are. Then you have what are called the negative and positive mind. So they take the mental body and they say that there's a positive, sort of optimistic part of your consciousness. There's a negative part of your consciousness, and then there's a neutral part of your consciousness. Then you have what's called the arc line, which for them is like the halo. It goes from ear to ear. So saints, high ascended masters, they have what's called an arc line. And that's a protective field that can protect you from disasters. Then, of course, many of you have heard of the aura. It's like the sheath outside of you and expresses the health that you have. People can read auras, like this person is full of rage, or this person is actually very clean energetically, or this person is gonna get hit by a truck because their aura is full of like little dense pockets, or they have a psychic attachment to them. You know, so that's your auric body. Then your pranic body is your energy body. your subtle body to me is your body of light. It's literally what Crowley talks about when he talks about projecting yourself up in Libra O, that whole section there that talks about astral projection. That's the subtle body. Then your radiant body gets a little tricky. That's like the outer sheath of the aura. Then your physical body. So bottom line is that you can double these 10 bodies and really, really get deep. You can double the 5 bodies and get really, really nuanced. But the big takeaway here is that you're more than your flesh, and that a practice like Kundalini Yoga is really about activating these other bodies and getting them to work together. And also getting you to sort of, like I know people, when I spent a lot of time in Asia, and people, they'd say, I went to the the Western doctor and he couldn't find a problem. I went to the psychotherapist, he wouldn't find a problem. So I went to a spiritual advisor. He said, oh, you've got a karmic affliction. Like, we don't even talk about that in the West. Like, oh, you have a karmic affliction. But this is where something like the subtle body speaks to that you have these other faculties, you're not seeing them. And that's where these things can show up. And so when you're working mantras, pranayama, asana, devotional work, energetic work, you're kind of cleansing and the whole thing, so that ultimately you wouldn't, get hit by a truck, even though your bank account's great and everything's going good in your life. You're kind of dealing with the whole thing, not just a piece of it. So yeah, I'm going to pause there, see if there's questions about the multidimensional body and whatnot. Okay, cool. So moving on, I didn't have this slide. So this basically is an illustration of the 10 bodies. So I think I've given an overarching discussion of the anatomy and the physiology of consciousness, and the goal of working yourself up through the layers to integrate and balance them to attain that sense of unity consciousness and shunya, that non-dual awareness, and also the fact that we have to work through multiple dimensions of our body, that we're not just, a meat sack here. And that's why just asana yoga that just deals with the flesh, it's okay, it's good, but like, whole systems yoga, a lot of it doesn't translate when it came west. It kind of got cut off at Hawaii. They only brought the get a tight butt, and look really good. But yoga is a big system, and classic yoga is woven into these tantric ideas that you don't necessarily hear in your average, 24-hour fitness yoga class. So hopefully I've given a general sense of what the practice is, the anatomy, the physiology, and why you would even be doing it. So now we're going to talk about how this actually shows up in Thelemic material, and how it actually shows up in some of the practices that are part of what we understand as, the Thelemic magical system. All right, so within the AA, which is the Inner Magical Order of Thelema, there are several places where parts of this knowledge of Kundalini Yoga is apparent. Within the neophyte content are basic yogic preliminaries. In Libra E, Crowley summarized, the practice of asana. There aren't a lot of them in there, things like the thunderbolt, the dragon, but the fact that you need to do some sort of seated posture, the fact that you need to work with breath control, even the idea of alternate nostril breathing is sort of spoken of. He talks about, mental focus. And of course, the other 8 limbs are talked about in Yoga for Yahoos and Yellow Bellies. So, Crowley was very familiar with the basic components, and they're showing up there in that part of the content. In Energized Enthusiasm, which is one of the most interesting of Crowley's essays, he talks about the correlation literally between sexuality and creativity and the life force. And he speaks to the idea that you can store up your life force, you can not come for 40 days. See what that does for your creativity. But he also says, the opposite. When I sort of blocked myself, I didn't see as much creativity. But what he's identifying there is there's a direct relationship between vitality, creativity, sexuality, and Kundalini. He's not, going into all the nuances, but he definitely is speaking to this idea that there's a latent power there that is accessible within a person, and through ecstatic states like dancing, going to the edge of your, altered states of consciousness. You can access this raw, creative, powerful potential. But he gets very, very specific the further you go into the material. So when you get to the Zalater grade, there is an essay, there is an article, not an article, it's an essay, it's Liber HHH, which each of the H's, I've been told, is associated with breath, because in the Golden Dawn, the letter H is the aspirant for breath. And so he's speaking to the power of the sacred power of prana, you know, and the ability to access, you know, sort of creative power through breath. So he writes there's 3 meditations in Liber HHH, and he writes, examination is only in the knowledge of some little practical acquaintance with these meditations. The complete result, if attained, would confer much higher grades. He says, jump in, read this material, but if you're not going to really get it unless you really practice it for a long time. And if you really did understand it, not just by virtue of the theory, you would be a very high level master. Because it's like, if you got Liber HHH, which is really about accessing the Kundalini and raising it up, you would be getting a lot about what adeptship really means. And so where did Crowley get, and let me explain, well, what does Liber HHH exactly mean? I'm going to tell you in a moment, but it's said that Crowley got the techniques in Liber HHH from a Sri Lankan Hatha and Raja yoga teacher named Sri Sapati Swami. You can read about this in Aleister Crowley in India by Tobias Churton. And also there's a scholar, Keith Cantu, who has traced the relationship between the tantric technique of Liber HHH and where Crowley got it. And I'm going to unpack what that method is here in a moment. But Liber HHH to me is the closest fit between everything I just told you and what you see in Crowley's system for adeptship within Thelema. And when I actually explain the technique, you're going to see, you know, the relationship between Kundalini Yoga and what Crowley's writing. Then in Liber Ashvel Capricorni Pneumatici, which is the Dominus Liminis part of the curriculum, he explicitly is talking about the concentration and control of sexual force for magic power, which is very much in line with Kundalini Yoga, that you're going to activate, you know, when you work the lower triangle, when you activate these lower energies in your lower chakras, you build up sort of an inner heat, which in yoga is, the word is tapas, which means like inner aesthetic heat. And that inner aesthetic heat is basically, which gives you magical power. It gives you, you know, creative power. You know, there's a direct correlation between aestheticism, which is basically self-discipline, generating this inner heat and this inner power, and the ability then to do magical workings. And so that's really what you get in Liber, you know, Liber Ashvel Capricorni Pneumatici, is basically really speaking to the relation between sexual power and creative power and magic power, which is what Kundalini Yoga is trying to cultivate. And then in Liber Yod, in the Dominus Liminis part of the AA curriculum, Crowley literally says, Ajna is the master and worker. You are the wooden monkey. So he's basically saying this intuitive, you know, command center, paid a lot of attention to that, because this is really, really important here for your development as an adept. So the bottom line here is that Crowley, you know, having studied yoga, having spent time in Sri Lanka, having studied under Sri Sapati Swami, is integrating all these pieces of what we call Kundalini Yoga into the AA curriculum. And you kind of get them in sort of scattershot ways as you work up through the system, but it's there. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions before I really dig into HHH. All right, so there's a subset of Liber HHH. There's like 3 meditations in there. But one of them, Liber SSS, and I actually don't know what the 3 S's there mean. Like I said, this was influenced by Swami Sahapati Swami, who was a teacher of, you know, the royal yoga of Shiva. And so basically, this is how Crowley describes the practice. And when I explain a Kundalini Yoga practice, you'll see how similar this is. This practice is very similar to a staple practice we have in Kundalini Yoga called Sat Kriya. So I'm gonna really quickly, I can't really demo it to you, but basically what you do is put your hands over your head like this, similar to the position in the Gnostic Mass, right? And what you do is you basically contract all your lower muscles when you say the sound Sat. And what you're doing is you're squeezing all the energy from the base as if a thunderbolt of lightning is shooting up through your Shushumna, up through your crown, towards infinity, the bosom of Nuit, whatever your sense of divinity is, Sat. And then you release it all and you say the sound Nam, which means identity. So the word Sat is truth, Nam is identity. And you do this for like 3 to 5 minutes, and you generate a lot of internal heat by squeezing the lower chakras, pulling this energy up, yoking it, and vertically aligning it with source consciousness. So that's a central practice in Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. So what I'm going to explain to you now is Liber SSS, which in my mind is very, very similar. They're not exactly the same, but this is a practice that Crowley writes about in Liber SSS. So be seated in thine asana, preferably the thunderbolt, which is literally sitting on your knees. It is essential that the spine be vertical. In this practice, the cavity of the brain is the yoni. The spinal cord is the lingam. So think that you're basically, the yoni is in the brain, the spine is the phallus. Concentrate thy thought of adoration in the brain. So you're adoring your brain. Now begin to awaken the spine in a similar manner. Now begin to awaken your attention to your spine. Concentrate thy thought of thyself in the base of the spine and move it gradually up a little at the time. So start to envision, this is a visualization. The spine is starting to wake up, but this means thou wilt become conscious of the spine, feeling each vertebrae as a separate entity. This must be achieved most fully and perfectly before further practices beginning. So basically, you need awareness of what's up here, you need awareness of the spine. Now, adore the brain as before, the figure to thyself, this content as infinite. Deem it to be the womb of Isis or the body of Nuit. So your brain is like the receptacle, it's the void, it's shunya, it's that vast emptiness. Now identify thyself at the base of the spine as before, but figure to thyself its energy is infinite. Deem it to be the phallus of Osiris or being of Hadit. These two concentrations may be pushed to the point of samadhi. So keep, envision the void, envision the phallus. It's like you're trying to get the spine to go up, get this, it's like, but this is all imagination though. This is not like what I just showed you is like an energetic physical exercise. Here, this is just a one-pointed concentration of the spine basically fucking the brain, the spine fucking the brain, the spine fucking the brain. And over time, he says, let this agony grow until it's unsupportable, resisting by will every temptation, not until thy whole body is bathed in sweat, or maybe in a sweat of blood, until a cry of intolerable anguish is forced from thy closed lips, shalt thou proceed. Now let a current of light, deep azure flecked with scarlet, pass up and down the spine, striking as it were upon thyself that curled at the base as a serpent. Let this be exceedingly slow and subtle, and though it is accompanied with pleasure, resist, and though it be accompanied with pain, resist. Thou shalt continue until thou art exhausted, never relaxing the control until thou canst perform this one action during a whole hour, proceed not. So basically, and withdraw, do some pranayama with kambukam, which means breath retention, and basically rest. So I didn't read every bullet point, but the bottom line is you visualize the spine as a phallus, the brain as a yoni, the brain as the body of Nuit, the vast void, shunya, emptiness. The phallus is one-pointed hadit, and you just start to you're just having sex with yourself. And then over time, this makes you start to sweat. And over time, it should put you into a place of ecstasy. And then over time, this will waken up the Kundalini, which will start to swirl up towards the crown. And thus you will have that union of Shiva and Shakti, of the one and the zero, of the infinite and the finite within yourself. So this to me is the most Kundalini Yoga-like practice in anything that Aleister Crowley taught. And he said that this is something you need to do after you've got the base fundamentals of asana, pranayama, dharana, dhyana. You need to get those basic things down to be able to do this. So this is very similar to what we practice in Kundalini Yoga. We do a lot of pranayama, asana, we do all that kind of stuff. And then Sat Kriya is always tacked at the end of our practices, which is basically that Sat Nam, Sat Nam. And so I've actually gone back and forth between these two things, and they're very complementary. One is more visualization, the other is actually more using breath and locks and movement. But there's a strong synergy between these two. But the bottom line is you're getting the low to come to the high, the base to unite with the infinite, you're balancing opposites, and you're moving the Kundalini Shakti up as you practice. So that is kind of the most, that's the summary of the stuff in the AA content. I'm gonna move on to talk about Kundalini Yoga and the OTO, but I'm gonna pause and see if there's any questions before we move on. Okay. Yeah, so this is basically just a quote here. Thou art a beautiful thing, wider than a woman in the columnless vibration. I shoot up vertically like an arrow and become the above, but it is death in the flame of the pyre. Ascend in the flame of thy pyre, O my soul. Thy God is like the cold emptiness of the utmost heavens, into which thou radiate thy light. When thou shalt know me, O empty God, my flame shall utterly expire in thine great Nox. So that Nox, N-O-X, the night of Pan, Shunya, void, the bosom of Nuit. These words are so parallel to things you'll see in Kundalini Yoga. We don't have NOX, we don't have that, but Shunya, void, the light aspiring towards the infinite. Basic ideas, very similar. All right, so now the history of the OTO also makes reference to Kundalini Yoga. As we know, the OTO itself was started by Karl Kellner and Theodor Royce, who were deeply interested in tantric yoga practices as well as sex magic. Another quote, this is from Theodor Royce from an article he wrote called Mystic Anatomy in the Oriflame in 1913. Any student who desires to study Hermetic science must have not only a thorough knowledge of ordinary anatomy, he must also apply this his knowledge of ordinary medical science to the requirements of Hermetic physiology in order to understand the finer forces of nature, which alone will enable him to realize what mystic anatomy is. So, he's basically, and he goes on to write a really long article, and he basically outlines what the tattvas are, which are the elements, which I talked about, how they map to the chakras. He talks about basically the Sushumna, the Ida and Pingala. He talks about the sex force. He talks about the pineal gland. He basically, in this article, Mystic Anatomy, Royce basically is explaining Kundalini Yoga in 1913. And he was a student of yoga, as was Kellner. And so you'll see that very early on in the turn of the at the beginning of the 20th century, this interest in this system is kind of being carried forward by the founders of the OTO. So yeah, basically, and we know in the grades within the OTO that Crowley associated the different chakras to different OTO degrees. Muladhara the nerval, Svadhisthana the third, Manipura the fourth, Anahata the second, Visuddha first, Ajna, Minerval, and fourth, and Shashara. So he mapped them and believed that the different initiations activated them, but didn't necessarily finish all the work. They kind of started a process that you yourself have to work through. But yeah, so the point being here is that whether we're talking Royce's writing of Mystic Anatomy, the fact that Karl Kellner and Royce were interested in this tantric technology, or Crowley's mapping of the chakras to the initiations, that there is this sort of deep-seated interest within the OTO in Kundalini Yoga and how it works. So moving on, many of you not know who Kenneth Grant was, but he was, as well as Isno Rigardi, one of Crowley's secretaries, who went on to claim his own title as head of the OTO, even though he was eventually expelled by Karl Germer. That said, he himself synthesized tantric teachings with Thelema in a fascinating manner worthy of exploration, even though it was Kabbalah and references of Cthulhu, in my opinion, aren't super valuable. But he did do a lot of work in trying to unite tantric ideas with Thelema, and he was a student of David Kerwin, who was a tantric adept, who was also ninth in the OTO. And Crowley, there's a great book called Brother Crowley, Brother Kerwin, where they argue, because Crowley's trying to get secrets, tantric secrets he didn't necessarily have from Kerwin. So highly recommend that book. But Kenneth Grant basically wrote a bunch of books, and you have to dig through his very abstract language. The first three books are probably the best, in my opinion. But he did write a lot about Kundalini. He uses the word the fire snake, and he talks a lot about basically Kundalini Yoga in the first three books. And the further on you go in his books, the more antediluvian, Space Brothers, far out sci-fi stuff. But because he was a student of David Kerwin, because he himself was initiated by Kerwin into Tantra, and because he was also a student of Thelema, he did do a really interesting job of trying to synthesize these two perspectives into his take on Thelema. So I do find some of Grant worthy of attention when it gets into the Kundalini Yoga sort of Thelema sort of combination. So just this quote from Grant The etheric body contains vortices of immense magical energy, which attract and concentrate within themselves cosmic forces from outer space. They have affinities with the principal endocrine glands situated in the physical body, of which are of primary importance from an occult standpoint. They also correspond to the 7 chakras. So, you know, he was interested in Kundalini Yoga. He talked about its importance. He did some stuff underneath David Kerwin. But yeah, the further you go into him, the more arcane it gets. But yet, nonetheless, another reference within the OTO system, even though Grant's was his own version of it, about Kundalini Yoga that is worthy of maybe exploring. Okay, so this to me is where it kind of comes home. So in 1973, Grady McMurtry, Hymenaeus Alpha, the man who revitalized the OTO after World War II, joined the Sikh order known as the Happy, Healthy, Holy Organization, or 3HO, where he took his yoga lessons. And it wasn't until the summer of 1974 that he began growing his trademark beard. All photos of him with this beard are after this period. Yogi Bhajan on the left came to America in 1968, bringing Kundalini Yoga and Sikh Dharma, where he started this organization to propagate Kundalini Yoga. And it now has about 100,000 members. I've been a member of it since 1994 when I finished my first teacher's training, the first year I took my Minerval. And so basically the year I took my Minerval. And so for me, like I said, these sort of two track together. And on the right, you have pictures of Grady McMurtry. He looks very similar to Yogi Bhajan. He very much was inspired by Yogi Bhajan. Apparently, he even took Amrit, which is basically he himself became an initiated Sikh. I did not know this until recently, but there's a ritual within Sikh Dharma where you basically say, you take a confirmation as a Sikh. And while he was leading the OTO, he also took Amrit, which kind of blew my mind. But yeah, so he's in that upper right, he's doing Sat Kriya, which is that exercise I just showed you. And in the lower right, he's basically teaching a meditation class. And on the upper left and lower right, left, you see Yogi Bhajan. So yeah, really interesting that, the man who revitalized, the OTO post World War II was also deeply interested in Kundalini Yoga and was a student of Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan, where I did my teacher's training in Eugene at Yoga West. And I learned all of this from a Thelemite. So like I said, I kind of have this schizophrenia about these two different worlds here. But yeah, bit of interesting history there. These are all from Jerry Cornelius's photo archive. So yeah, bit of background. So moving on. Oh yeah. So both Grady, this is pictures of Grady and his wife, Phyllis Seckler. They both apparently studied with Yogi Bhajan when he gave a teacher training in Marin County in the early 70s. So I didn't know this, but I think Phyllis actually studied with him too. And he, though, said, be careful of Sikh values, even though he took Amrit. So here's the thing. The values of Sikh Dharma very much inform the practice of Kundalini Yoga. And I, being a Thelemite, I don't necessarily adhere to them, but there are values within Sikh Dharma that I wouldn't necessarily follow as a Thelemite. So he tried to sort of separate out the two things, like do the practice, and you can see him there doing some different asanas in the bottom, but don't, as a Thelemite, don't get too bought up in the value set. But yeah, he was doing that dance. I don't think Israel Rigardi, who's in the upper picture, was also a student of Kundalini Yoga, but definitely Grady was. See him there wearing his turban, and I think Phyllis was. So yeah, pretty fascinating history, OTO history there. Okay, so just a little bit. I've sort of talked at a very high level of what Kundalini is, but I'm going to talk explicitly about how this translates to, I'm just going to watch my time here, how this translates to magical practice. So in Kundalini Yoga, we do kriyas, which are synergistic combinations of asana, pranayama, mantra, mudra, and meditation. And they focus on developing your whole system. And I really do feel that this approach to yoga, for me, because I've actually done the stuff that Crowley teaches in Liber E, I think it's very complementary. I think that the kinds of things you can get out of practicing this form of yoga are very beneficial for concentrating attention, concentration, developing your inner vitality, developing your intuitive capacities. These are all things that I very much feel support a magician in their work and on the path of adeptship. The other thing, really powerful thing about Kundalini Yoga Kriyas is they're very specific. So they dial into things like, you might do a Ashtanga set over and over again, but there are Kriyas that just focus on building your willpower. You can do like a set that just builds your navel strength for 40 days, really ripped abs, or really focuses on intuition. You can do a 40-day set that just focuses on building out your intuitive capacity or opening your heart chakra, because we're really dialing in to what faculty of your total self do you want to enrich. So I feel that's very valuable for a magician. There's also a lot of really powerful Raja Yoga meditations. We know that Raja Yoga through Vivekananda is one of the foundational books in Crowley's recommended writings. And so there's really powerful meditations in Kundalini Yoga that really help with concentration, intuition, prosperity. There's meditations to bring money, which is like magical meditations. There's meditations that can bring money if you need it. Crowley said that Thelema is on the order of 90% self-discipline. It's one of his most important quotes. And this is all about sadhana, means discipline. Like Kundalini Yoga is all about sadhana. You commit to something, you do it, and like, you're going to get stronger. Same thing in martial arts. You commit to something, you do it. So I feel that that's very resonant with Thelema, is, having the commitment, having that willpower, that strength, a presence of mind that you're going to, keep to it. Kundalini Yoga from Yogi Bhajan, it comes out of the Khalsa tradition, because he was a Sikh, and the Khalsas, they're spiritual warriors. The Khalsas, they were, the Sikhs, they're like a warrior saint tradition. And so when I think about the notion of knight monks of Thelema and the Templar lineage, like for me, in my mind, this sort of spiritual warrior idea of the Khalsa and Sikh sort of Templars, those match in my mind, so I think that there's something there to think about, that spiritual warrior, because Kundalini Yoga is coming out of a warrior tradition. And I think that's very complementary with this sort of Templar warriors for the new eon, that how I conceptualize Thelema. And then, big part of Kundalini Yoga is resolving, Crowley said, a big part of the path of initiation is resolving complexes. You got to simplify the complex. If you got all these complicated things, as you work through the elements, as you work through initiations, you're simplifying things. It's a sophisticated simplification. It's not like a child. You have experience, you have awareness, but if you have these neuroses, if you have these mental complexes, shadow complexes, whatever it is, this work, which in yoga theory would be related to samskaras, they're kind of past life patterns you've carried from lifetime. It helps smooth them over. It helps purify that stuff. When I was taught Kundalini Yoga, I was like, it's like clarifying ghee. Butter is fatty, and you add heat to the butter, and the butter melts, and you got a clear substance. That's what resolving complexes is you're basically removing all that fat of the mind, fat of the soul, fat of karma, so that things are smooth, and thus you flow with the universe. Then there's emphasis in Kundalini Yoga of moving from karma to dharma, which to me is moving from an unaware existence to true will. Like karma is you're in your fated patterns. You're just kind of reactive. You're just kind of in a state of, ignorance. And dharma is basically your purpose in life. And that's what yoga is meant to help you move, is from karma to dharma. To me, that's the same thing as uninitiated consciousness to true will. You're moving from an unattained, unaware, muddled state of complex, unbalanced selfhood to balanced, integrated, tuned, and aligned, flowing with the universe. So that's how I conceptualize the matching of Kundalini Yoga to the Thelemic project. Kundalini Yoga is very much about affirming sexuality. Even though they may not be into the, the wild, crazy stuff that, Crowley promotes, and I'm fine with, they do very much value the activation of the Kundalini, the sexual power, the lower triangle. There's no impurification. There's nothing in Kundalini Yoga that disdains the lower chakras. There's nothing wrong with the lower chakras at all, but you don't want them out of whack. You don't want them okay, you're addicted, you have a sexual addiction, you have no control of your life, you're running all over the place. It's like, no, get yourself together, balance yourself, and that resonates to me, things like be not animal, refine thou thy raptures. I see the complementarity there between, the practice of self-discipline, disciplining your sexuality, and the tantric idea thereof. And then, Kundalini Yoga, it has a spirit of what's called charity kala, which means ever rising spirit, which basically means you're unconquerable. You have a sense of fearlessness. Because think about it, if you're tuned to the divine, what can you be afraid of? Death? Like, why would you care? Like, you're part of infinite. To me, this is the same idea of Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun. The idea that basically the sun is afraid of nothing. It just is a powerful streaming solar light. And so like that spirit in Kundalini Yoga, like Charity Kala, ever rising spirit, to me is very resonant with the sort of idea of Sol Invictus that I read into Thelema, the sort of unconquerable sun energy that we're activating through Liber Resh, daily devotional, tuning to the sun. To me, that's very similar to the spirit of Charity Kala, ever rising spirits. And then another big principle, there's manifestations for prosperity in Kundalini Yoga that basically help you be better in the world. Yogi, Crowley in Dangers of Mysticism, he shuns shut up mystics that are above it all, that don't go into the fray of life. He says things like the playground, I don't have the exact quote, the playground is the great corrective to the person that's got an inflated head, going out and competing, engaging life, engaging the fray. And from that, you find who you really are. And so the point in Kundalini Yoga is there's a lot of things that are about bringing, worldly engagement. Like you're not supposed to just do this practice and not have a job, do this practice and not be present to life. It's like you want to do stuff in the world while you're doing your sadhana. Otherwise, it doesn't really count, at least in this tradition. Maybe there are some more renunciate paths, but Kundalini Yoga is very much a lean in spiritual practice. It is not about like contemplative mysticism. It's very much a warrior yoga. And so there's meditations that are about being in prosperity and abundance because you need money. You need to have success so you can fulfill your purpose, your will. The more, the better. The more power, the better. Think about it. If Kundalini Shakti is all about your full creative potential, the more power, the better. The more power you can bring into yourself, the more you can activate, the more that you can attain, the better. If you're doing your dharma, so there's nothing in there about holding back, that keeping yourself small. There's no playing small here in this discipline. And finally, Tantra and cities. We talk about magic all the time, right? Magic, magic, magic. Well, there's a direct correlation between Kundalini Yoga and activating psychic potentials, cities, which means perfections. You do a 40-day meditation with your Ajna chakra, you're going to have some you're going to have some really superpower intuition. You're going to be able to have, faculties that you didn't have before. So not that you should necessarily activate these powers all the time, but there's nothing in Kundalini Yoga that says you shouldn't, tap higher psychic potentials, which I think very much resonates with the practice of magic. You want to change things in conformity with will. So why not have tools and techniques that give you the ability to do that make you better at doing that? So yeah, these are 11 practices of Thelemic Kundalini Yoga that I think are relevant for Thelemic Magick. I know that was a lot, but I'm just going to pause here and see if there's any questions. We're almost coming home here to the end, but yeah, see if there's any questions about these principles or anything that I've talked about so far. No? Okay, so moving on then, just towards the end. So I was going to have people, when I taught this at Noticon, because we were all in a room, we actually did some practice together, but I don't know if that really works in this format. So I'm going to just, actually, we're going to do if people are up for this, we'll do something very, very simple, very simple. If you're willing, if you could just sit up straight in your chair, and we'll do a very simple practice together. So like I said, sun, moon, okay? So your left nostril is your lunar nostril, your right nostril is your solar nostril. We're going to do some very simple alternate breath breathing with kambukam, or breath retention. So the idea is you block off your left nostril, you inhale for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 16, you block off both nostrils, then you exhale for a count of 8, then you'll inhale for a count of 4, the right nostril, you'll hold for a count of 16, and you'll exhale for a count of 8. This is a very simple balancing meditation. We're just going to do this for a cycle of maybe 6 rounds. So starting sitting up straight, inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now the right nostril. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Your own count. Just count to 16 for yourself. And then when you're ready, exhale for a count to 8. And we'll just continue a few more rounds. Last round. Now inhale. Close your eyes down and pull up on your rectum, navel, and sex organs. Squeeze those inner muscles and then try to pull that energy down to your navel point. So you're pulling up from the base and you're pushing down from the above, and just focus at your navel point and squeeze really, really tight. And relax the breath in the lock. And inhale without the hands, just inhale deeply. Inhale deeper, deeper. Pull up on that root lock, squeeze the rectum, navel, second organ, squeeze the energy up, push the energy down, focus on that navel chakra. Imagine a blazing star at your navel point, radiant, powerful, potent blazing star. And exhale. And last time, inhale. Inhale deeper, deeper. Pull up on that root lock, Muladhara chakra, rectum, navel, sex organ, squeeze the energy up, push the energy down, focus on your third chakra, your navel point, your center of will, radiate, blazing star, power of your will, concentrate all the force of the infinite stellar radiance burning at your navel point. And exhale, relax. Inhale and exhale. Just like feel that for a moment. So that's just a taste of what we do when we do a Kundalini Yoga class. We'll usually start off with some warm-ups. We'll do a rigorous Kriya. Then we'll do a layout. We'll do some pranayama. Then we'll do a meditation. And I don't know where you are, but in Eugene, Yoga West is where I was trained. They have classes there. You can find a lot of great Kundalini Yoga classes online. But I really do think it's a very complementary practice for Thelemic Magick and mysticism, and a potent tool. And it's cool that Grady McMurtry was a teacher of it. So there's that. And Yogi and Aleister Crowley had studied very similar things in the materials he presented. So yeah, just kind of closing out. So we began with a serpent and ended with a goat. Remember what I quoted at the beginning. Both the words for Messiah, Mashiach, and serpent Nahash add up to 358. Therefore, there is some deep-seated connection between the devil and salvation. But what might salvation look like? And even is there even any such thing in Thelema? Crowley writes in Magic Without Tears, every magician must firmly extend his empire to the depths of hell. And he further writes, my adepts stand upright, their heads above the heavens and their feet beneath the hells in Liber Tzadeh. And then in Liber 11 Belkaze, he writes, for perfection abideth not in the pinnacles or in the foundations, but in the ordered harmony of one with all. The perfect and the perfect are one perfect and not two, nay, are none. Nothing is a secret key of this law. And Kundalini Yoga said, Yogi Bhajan said, Kundalini Yoga is a method to become empty so that everything can flow through you. So true will is aligned with emptiness, sunya, sahaj, wu wei. It's the empty flowing and co-creating with the Tao in the body of Nuit forever. So all of these different methods of equilibrating opposites, having your heads above the hells and your feet beneath the heavens, having the perfection not in the pinnacles or foundations, but in the ordered harmony of one with all, you know, uniting beyond the opposites from the many to the one and the one to the none, identifying nothing as the secret key of this law. All these are part and parcel of the corpus and practice of Kundalini Yoga and Thelemic Magick. They are two streams that lead to the same ocean. They are two methods that have the ultimate same goal. They're two forms of language that have the same trajectory. You know, ceremonial magic with its visualizations, with its consecrations, with the invocations, the evocations. There's a tool set there. Kundalini Yoga with its pranayama, asana, mantra, mudra. There's a tool set there, and these are complementary. Crowley tried to unite what he could in the AA curriculum. Kundalini Yoga to me is the powerhouse and the engine behind both, because you're working with your full spectrum body, you're working with all the energies, all the faculties, you're disciplining the flesh, you're cleansing the chakras, and you're tuning yourself to the divine. So yeah, there's a lot to be said beyond that, but I think that that's kind of it for what I wanted to say. The goat climbs the holy mountain, true will, sahaja, samadhi, and wu wei. One final note. So like when you ask me today, what's the goal of all this? So two big goals in Kundalini Yoga, and I'm going to talk about that in relationship to Thelema. So Jivan Mukti, why are you doing this as a yogi? So Mukti means liberation. So you're outside the cycle of cause and effect. You know, you're not you're not, up one day, down another. You're not running around on a rat wheel of repeating patterns. So why you do this practice is so that you're free of all those patterns in this life, as opposed to you're going to be free in death, mukti. Everybody dies, mukti. The whole idea in Kundalini Yoga and all tantric yogas is in this life, right here and right now. You've zeroed it out, but you're still fully living. You're celebrating, you're participating, but you're not accumulating karma because you're so tuned to the divine, the dharma, but you freed yourself from your karma. So you're still living, you're still enjoying, you're still experiencing, but you're outside the duality of opposites. So that's Jivan Mukti. And then the other big goal is Sahaja Samadhi, which basically means, Sahaj means spontaneous enlightenment. Sahaja Samadhi, basically you're just in the flow. You know, it's like you're not even rationalizing everything. It's like, you know, if Will stops and asks why, you know, it's like you're just in the flow of being and doing. And so Sahaja Samadhi is basically that state of consciousness, of spontaneous co-creation with the infinite, such that you're enjoying it, you're participating in it, but you're not basically accumulating karma as a result, but you're still fully present, you're still fully engaged, and you're in a spontaneous relationship intuitively to the right time and the right place, which to me is exactly the same thing as Wu Wei in the Taoist idea, that you're acting not from a place of like controlling, dominating, manipulation, but you're still acting. You're acting effortlessly. So true will, Sahaja Samadhi, Wu Wei, Jivan Mukti, these are all different ways of sort of speaking to the same thing in my interpretation. Yeah, and then hopefully you're enjoying the ride. So that's kind of it. I think that, you know, we talked a lot about different theories, different approaches. There is, like I said, in the Coph Nia Wand, summer 2013, I break down the relationship between some of these Kundalini Yoga practices and Libra Samek, which is a practice I did when I was in the Golden Dawn. And it's basically to tune you to your guardian angels. So yeah, I talk about the complementarity between Kundalini Yoga and Libra Samek and how they're very resonant with each other and how they support one another. Yeah, I think that's kind of all I wanted to talk about today about Kundalini Yoga and Thelemic Magick. I know that was a lot. I probably, said maybe too fast, but I'm happy to answer any questions or anything people want to talk about for the rest of the 10 minutes. Yeah, there's a question, please.
Yeah, you were mentioning how you it sounded like maybe you started off at like what is it in Eugene, Yoga West?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a great yoga studio. They have classes, probably 10 classes a week.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Maybe no more than 10, like 20.
I have something.
Yeah.
Mark has some classes on his YouTube channel.
Oh yeah,
If
that's
you
what I
don't
forgot.
want to leave the house.
Yeah, so if you go to here, at the very bottom, YouTube, if you put in that URL, I have a Yurt here that I teach classes out of in Portland. And that I did like 10 classes last year during COVID because I couldn't leave the house, you know? And so if you wanted to do any of this stuff, they're up there, they're recorded. And yeah, you can just, you know, dive right in. Yep, they're there. Any other questions or anything people want to talk about?
It's kind of a little bit off point, but just thinking about the 5 bodies, the chart of 5 bodies that you showed, and thinking about, I had read, although I've never really seen this diagrammed anywhere, that certain tantric systems have 5 principal chakras rather than 7.
Yep.
And I wondered if the 5 bodies related to those in some way. And then also thinking how that would map very nicely on the 5 Sephiroth of the central pillar too. You know, if it would be interesting to see that mapped out somewhere. I don't know that I ever have.
You know, there's a book out there called The Subtle Body, and it's really thick. And it basically is like somebody tried to do this crazy, I'm going to see if I can pull up the author. Somebody tried to do this crazy mapping of all these different systems. And I mean, for instance, like, you know, that you're right. I mean, there are some systems that really, I mean, like for instance, Tibetan Buddhism, they really only focus, I mean, so they really focus on 5 of them. You know, they don't necessarily speak to 7, but like in Taoism, they're really just focusing on 3. I mean, really, they have the Shang Dantian, the Upper Dantian, Zhong Dantian, and Sha Dantian. It's almost like they're consolidating everything here, here, and here. And I've seen 10. So this works for me because I can think about the faculties, like, okay, projection of creativity, willpower, you know, but yeah, there's so many different systems out there. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, another one, like what's the relationship between prana and Kundalini? And they're not identical, obviously, but there seems there's some sort of relationship between the 2 of them.
Kundalini, the way I think of it, so prana is just like the life force. Okay. I think of Kundalini as a rarefied elite form of prana. Let me explain what I mean. All of us have breath, and when we don't have it, we're dead. We do practice like pranayama to balance it, to strengthen it. But there's a special kind of life force energy that is associated with your Muladhara chakra that is almost like prana that is not sleeping. It's almost like it's always there, and it's always there, and it's like in stasis to a degree. So it's like a life force. Everybody's gifted with it. You know what's something similar to it, I think a little bit is the well, so in Ayurveda, you've got well, in Chinese medicine, you've got Jing, which is like your bone marrow and your blood. So it's kind of like the basis of what you are. Then you have Qi, which is your life force, and then you have Shun, which is consciousness. So the thing about Kundalini is it's not like you're breathing Kundalini into the base of your spine. It's almost like it's wedded to your spine, and it's almost like it's there all the time. So it's almost, to me, it's almost like it's a fusion of Jing, Qi, and Shun at the same time. If I was going to use the Chinese language, it's mapped to your physiology. It's also got an energetic component, but it's also got a consciousness component. Whereas Qi, which is the same thing as prana, they're just what they are. So it's like it's got a physiological component, it's got an energetic component, and it's got an awareness component. That's Kundalini. And so that is different than like Qi / prana, which is just the life force, just the breath. Does that help at all?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Any other questions or queries or thoughts? Cool. Well, I wish I hadn't cursed, but it's on the recording. So it's on there, Thelemites, you know. But yeah, this is fun, and happy to answer any follow-up questions. Like I said, you can find those courses here at the end, and I'm happy to share these slides. I mean, I'll share them with you, Natalie, afterwards. If people want to have the slides, they can have them. But yeah, there's the slides, there's the article. There's no recording from Notocon, but yeah, this is what I have. So
Nice
thanks.
one, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. All right, well, if that's it, you guys have a great rest of your Saturday, and 93s.
93. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.